man? What's shaking?
Well, just turn my Wi-Fi off here so that my phone doesn't go bing, bing, bong.
Oh, yeah. And your email. Like people leave their email on. I'm interviewing them. It's all ding, ding.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't get that because I'm not smart enough to figure out how to turn that on, let alone turn it off. So, there you go.
You don't get any emails?
Oh, I do get emails. I get way too many emails, but it doesn't go ding, ding, ding. At least I should be thankful for small mercies, right?
Oh God, yeah, God, yeah. How are you,
Yeah.
man? Where are you? In New Hampshire?
I'm in New Hampshire. Are you in LA?
I am. What makes you land out there?
My wife, I remarried about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And my wife's from New Hampshire, has family here. I always wanted to escape LA anyway. I never meant to stay there. It's like so many people, you go to LA to do a job. In my case was to make a record. And then before you know it, you've spent most of your life there. So I was happy to make my exit. My plan was I have two college age daughters and from my previous marriage and my deal was always to myself. As soon as they went to college, I was gone. So as soon as my younger girl went to college, that was it.
I mean, you were there pretty young, and it's exciting back then in the Dio era and stuff. That I mean, LA was real fire back there. It was cheap and it was wild.
Oh, it was wild. Yeah. So I landed in LA in fall of 1982 to do the Holy Diver record with Dio. And yeah, it was in full swing.
Yeah. Where'd you guys record that? What studio? Was that at Sunset Sound?
No, Sound City.
Oh, that's right. Sound City. I seen it in there when I was in there. That's right. That's one of the iconic records done in there.
Yeah.
Did you see that Sound City documentary?
I have yet to see it. No, I've heard about it, but no.
Well, you lived it. So I'll tell you what I saw. I saw the very first Dio show ever at the Antioch Concert Barn.
Wow.
That was
the very first show. Yeah.
I was there. Do you remember that place? It's so crazy.
Yeah. I remember some of it. I mean, there's a lot of it I don't recall. Vinny Appice, Dio drummer, who I still play with in my side band, Last in Line. Vinny reminded me, and I'd forgotten about this, but Jimmy Bain, our bass player Jimmy. So Jimmy wanders over at one point during the show and actually leaned into me right at the moment when I went and turned the other direction. So Jimmy kind of, had a bit of a wobble, but Jimmy was notorious for never missing a note, so I doubt he even missed a note when that happened, even if he was playing on his back or doing cartwheels or whatever. I mean, Jimmy just, he was steady as a rock.
It's crazy to think, I grew up in the Bay Area and they had all these classic venues, you had the Fillmore, the Cow Palace, the Warfield. I mean, I could name them, go on. And here was some guy, I don't know the history of it, but I saw 3 shows there. He had a barn and like a farm and he was putting on concerts and Dio plays there.
Yeah, I don't know, but I would guess probably for 2 reasons. Number one is the first show, Ronnie probably didn't want a lot of pressure, like keep it as low key as was reasonable. And number 2, probably because his estranged wife at the time, Wendy, was managing him, and they probably give her a really, really good deal compared to, going with Bill Graham or some other big promoter or something. So they probably made more money doing it that way, but I don't really know. I mean, those would be my guesses. Yeah.
Oh, it's just all about the like better ticket cut. I get it.
Yeah, and then back then, I mean, tickets were dirt cheap.
What are like $12.50?
Yeah, a few bucks. I mean, it's bonkers where the concert industry is now. I mean, it's just a whole different thing, isn't it?
Oh man. I mean, well, I always say if you steal the records, you're gonna have to pay on the back end on the ticket price.
This is it. Yeah.
Yeah. People are like, I don't understand why the concerts are so expensive. Well, you don't pay for the records. That's why. Oh, okay.
Yep. Yes,
Let me ask you something. When you're young and you're starting out, you get I guess you got a Telecaster thin line. Is that correct?
I had a Telecaster thin line when I was about 14. I wanted a Stratocaster. Uh, I worked like I was such a guitar kid, and I worked like every weekend, every school holiday, all summer to buy guitar gear, to save up to buy guitars and effects pedals and stuff like that. And I wanted a Fender Strat originally because my first guitar hero was a guy called Rory Gallagher, an
Oh
Irish
yeah.
blues guitar player. And Rory had this beat up old early 60s Strat
Yeah.
that had no paint on it. It was all rusty from his sweat, you know, the bridge and stuff. And it just had so much patina. So that was the guitar of my dreams. I wanted a Fender Strat. And when I got it, I was going to like buff it out with sandpaper and stuff because I just wasn't into shiny new things because that guitar was anything but shiny new. Anyway, so my father, God bless him, was probably my biggest fan, I mean, and supporter. And so I was 14. I'd been working all summer. My birthday's at the end of summer, August 25th. And so the last week of the summer, I'm going back to school next week. I don't have enough money to buy the Stratocaster. My father went to the local little mom and pop music shop in the local town and said, you know, my son, it's his birthday. He's been working really hard. I want to surprise him. He wants a Fender, something. And they had a Fender Telecaster thin line. They didn't have a Strat. And if you know the Telecaster thin line, it's like a
Oh.
country and western guitar. It's got the F hole in it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, and
not,
it's hollow.
yeah, it's not a very rock and roll instrument. I mean, maybe it's trendy now. I've seen a few trendy guitar players play it, but back then it was not associated with the cool kids, if you know what I mean. So my father, God bless him, it was a Friday afternoon. I'd picked up my pay pack. I was going back to school the next week. I hadn't reached my target. And he rolls up and he opens the trunk of the car, says, I got something for you. Happy birthday. And he opens, I see Fender on the case. I'm like so excited. He opens up the case and I'm like, ah. You know,
Oh.
I had to kind of, you know, I was stoked. I was thrilled. I mean, it was a real Fender guitar. It was a serious step up from what I'd been playing. But, you know, I was so expecting it to be a Stratocaster and it wasn't. But anyway, so I had that for about a year or so. And I ended up saving enough money, and I traded it when I got my Gibson Les Paul 729-7537, the guitar I did the Holy Diver album and tour with, and I still own that. It's still my most valuable instrument because that was one I really learned how to play on. But by that time, I discovered Gary Moore, who became my ultimate guitar hero, and that's what put me on the path to having a Les Paul. So the Tele, you know, it was good. I learned a lot on the Telecaster, and then I got a very reasonable trade-in on it for my Les Paul when that arrived. So, yeah.
Did you get to see Rory at all?
Oh, it was not only the first album I had was live in Europe, 72, Rory
Love
Gallagher.
that record.
The first concert I saw was Rory Gallagher at the Ulster Hall. A year later, the second concert I saw was Rory Gallagher at the Ulster Hall. A year after that, the third concert I saw was Rory Gallagher at the Ulster Hall. You got to understand, this was Belfast in the 1970s.
Right.
Nobody came to Belfast. I mean, it was a rough town. You know, so you'd get all these bands who would be doing national tours on the UK mainland, and it would cost them more money to come play in Ireland because they'd have to ship the trucks and stuff. They'd have to fly in. They'd have to send the equipment on ferries and the buses and stuff. So it wasn't really cost efficient for bands to come and play Ireland. And then there was the added complication of bombs and people shooting each other. So they didn't really want to come to Belfast. So consequently, like very, very, very few of the major international acts would ever play in Belfast. Rory was born in Ireland. I believe he was born in Ballyshannon, County Donegal, but grew up in Cork, but also spent a lot of his formative years in Belfast before he became famous. And so he had a bit of an affinity for the city, and it was really good of him to come and play there, because I know there were a couple of times where he had a few cross-border incidents, like a couple of heavy guys in big jackets would come up to him and say, you know, we're going to put a bullet in your kneecap if you cross the border again and play Belfast. So I know that he literally, you know, took his life in his hands to actually play Belfast on one or two occasions. So I didn't realize that at the time, but I've heard that since, you know, and it was just, it makes me admire the man even more. I actually got to meet him. He signed my concert ticket once after one of his shows at the Ulster Hall. And then I met him years later. I interviewed him for a guitar magazine in the late 1980s, a few years before he passed away. And he was such a lovely, lovely human being. I mean, but he wasn't like a rock star. He was he was an authentic blues musician. I
Yeah.
mean, he really didn't want to be a star or a celebrity or anything like that. He just really lived for the music, and he's a very interesting guy.
He's just like a blue collar guitar guy, you know?
Yeah,
And man,
totally.
when you watch him, he is just, you know, him and Gary Moore, these guys that are super underrated, just crusher guitar players, you know?
Yeah. Well, Rory was, you know, Muddy Waters was his big influence, and he was really deeply invested in the blues, you know, and even though he had success um, in a more mainstream rock way, and even some in the UK, some very, very limited chart success with some singles off of his album, um, you know, he didn't, you know, go towards that. He wasn't seduced by that sort of aspect of the business and never really wanted to, you know. He was just like, he was constantly on the road. He was, that's where he was in his element. I mean, his records, as good as they were, never really matched his live performance. His live performance was just pure high energy,
Yeah.
you know. Each and every time I saw him, he never disappointed in that way. Gary Moore was a different thing. I mean, Gary Moore was just such an intense guitar player. I mean, incredible musician. The first time I heard Gary play, he was playing with John Heisman's Coliseum. It was jazz fusion, you
Wow.
know. And Billy Cobham, I think, was playing. You know, it was Don Airy on keys. I mean, it was mad, like a lot of notes. You know, it
Yeah.
was like real muso stuff, and it wasn't the kind of music that I gravitated towards per se. But the way that Gary played it, like the same way he played everything, just with pure aggression. I mean, I never ever heard Gary Moore play something like he didn't mean it. Like he
Yeah.
played everything like he wanted to murder his guitar. It was just a real intensity to his playing. So the very first time I heard Gary play, that totally put off something in me, and I just became obsessed with Gary Moore. I got a hold of every record that he ever did, and every record I could get my hands on, and just tried to listen to it and try and emulate him and play like him. And he covered so many genres. Like I said, it was the jazz fusion. There goes my freaking phone, and I thought I turned it off. What do you have to do? I took it.
Airplane mode.
Okay, I'll try that too. So anyway, so Gary, you know, he was jazz fusion, and then he went to okay, airplane mode. We'll see if that works as well. You know, he did rock, he did blues, he even did pop to an extent, you know, but no matter what genre he was playing, he just brought a real intensity to his guitar playing that no one has ever matched for me.
Yeah. I saw him on the I think 83 or whatever. Still got the blues tour at Wolfgang's in San Francisco, small club, like 2 feet away, just watching this guy just rip it apart, you know. And his playing was unreal. I mean, you know, obviously Thin Lizzy, you cannot, that's some of the greatest guitar playing ever for rock and roll, you know?
Yeah. Well, all the guitar players in Lizzy were a big influence.
All of them
I
are
mean,
fantastic.
You know, starting with Eric Bell, and then the classic lineup with Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson on guitar. Both of those guys were hugely influential for me. The Jailbreak album, the Black Rose album, and before Black Rose, that Live and Dangerous, I think, came out in 1978. I mean, I just absorbed that record. I mean, I learned every lick, you know, I could. And actually I did play with Thin Lizzy as a stunt guitarist for a few months in late 2010, early 2011, which was one of the highlights of my career, I gotta say. I mean, I made no money, you know. It was a rough old tour. In fact, any money I made from that tour, I spent on gear to try and get a more authentic Thin Lizzy type sound. But it was so much fun. I mean, to be on stage playing with Scott Gorham and Brian Downey, and Darren Wharton, even, you know, on keys, and just playing the songs of my youth. It really kind of took me back to being a teenager again. And actually, it really helped my guitar playing, because I came back off of that tour really kind of enthused again about playing guitar in a way that I hadn't been in many, many years, and just really excited to play again. You know, it kind of definitely relit my inner 17-year-old, you know.
I absolutely love the Renegade record. you know,
Yes.
Angel of Death. I mean, that record I think is phenomenal. And also the live record from that era, which is I think it's Still Life or what that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, I know.
That
Uh,
is
my first band was a band out of Belfast called Sweet Savage.
yeah, of course
And,
I
and
know it.
we opened for Lizzie on the entire Renegade tour. We did the whole UK Renegade tour.
Whoa.
So that was epic. We got to watch him every night. Snowy White was playing guitar on that tour. And, you know, he played with Pink Floyd and whatnot.
Yeah.
He was more of a session player, like more of a studio player. He wasn't really a rock and roll guitar player, and he didn't really want to be there. You could tell.
Oh.
And I really was like, yeah, like he actually teased me one night. They were right about to walk on stage, and I was at the side of the stage. We just finished our show, and I was there to watch them as usual. And he looked at me, and I'd been there like every single night watching it from the side of the stage. And he took his guitar off and he handed it to me. He says, "Do you want to do the gig for me?" Oh. Yeah. And so I'm just kidding. And he put the guitar back on. I said, oh, the teeth. But I really did. I really, you know, and I could have done it because I'd studied Lizzie so much. You know, I could have stepped on there that night and played the show and played all his parts. And anyway.
Did you get to talk to Phil much on that tour?
Yeah. Phil was a big supporter of ours. Phil was very proud to be Irish. Yeah. I mean, you know, you say he's Irish. I mean, he was like the only black man in Ireland at that time. But he was immensely proud of his Irish roots, you know.
I love that stage rap he had. Do we have any ladies out there with a little Irish?
Yeah.
Any ladies like a little more Irish in them or whatever? That is hilarious, man. Just a cool little sense of humor.
So he was so proud of being Irish, and he was very supportive of any Irish up and coming bands, which we were at the time. We never quite made it with Sweet Savage. We never got a major record deal. You know, we knocked on the door several times, but no one ever let us in. But Phil was a great supporter. He lived in Dublin, and we played a club called McGonagall's in Dublin quite a bit. And it was a couple of blocks away from this bar called the Bailey, and that was Phil's local bar. And if we played there on a Saturday night, which we did frequently, we knew that at about 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, if we went over to the Bailey, Phil would be there having a pint.
Wow.
And so on at least 2 occasions we did that. We'd set up our gear, do our sound check. We went over to the Bailey, we had a pint. Phil was there, and you know, he's had 1 or 2 scoops already. And I'll get up, play with this. So we came over to the club and actually got up and we played Are You Ready?
Wow.
You know, and so he played it and sang it with us on a couple of times. So he was cool that way. He's just really supportive, you know, really into it and really into helping people and stuff. And he was also, I will say, you know, at this stage of my life, I've been in the industry for decades. I've met so many rock stars, celebrities, whatever. I've never met anyone that had the charisma of Phil Lynott. I mean, Phil would walk into a room, any room, anywhere, and everyone would stare at him. I mean, he was tall, he was striking looking, he dressed like a rock star, even, you know, when he was running around in his sweatpants or whatever, he oozed rock star, you know, and he was just magnetic, and on stage, like, you couldn't take your eyes off of him. He was the show with Lizzie. So, he had this intense charisma that you just couldn't ignore. So
how did that Metallica come about doing Killing Time? It had to be Lars, right? Because when I'm young, nobody's got a grip on Sweet Savage. Of course, you know, we're listening to Saxon and Iron Maiden and all that new wave of British heavy metal stuff, but there was all these little bands on the outside of that too. And Lars was that kind of guy that would just dig through bins.
Exactly. Yeah. Lars, I guess, I mean, I've heard a story that Lars used to get cassette tapes, you know, from the UK that had all these, you know, Praying Mantis and all these other sort of not quite A-list new wave of British heavy metal bands, you know, of which Sweet Savage was one. So I gotta imagine that's how he, you know, heard of us when he heard the Killing Time song, and then I guess they started playing it. Interestingly, though, I mean, there was a band out of Wales, a 3-piece band called Budgie.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
And so we, you know, in Sweet Savage, we played our own music, but we also did maybe about 25% cover songs in our show, but we wanted to do covers that were kind of more obscure. So one of the covers that we did was a song called Bread Fan by
Oh, yeah.
Budgie.
Yeah.
And
They do.
we opened our show with that song. And then it struck me as very, very coincidental that many years later, I heard a bootleg of a Metallica show where they also opened with Bread Fan by Budgie. So I just thought, what are the chances? Like they're on one side of the globe, we're on the other, and
Yeah.
it is small
Yeah.
world,
I
literally.
learned a lot from Metallica, and I was major deep into music. I mean, music is my life growing up, still is, other than comedy. And I learned so much from Metallica, Merciful Fate, Budgie, Diamond Head,
Yeah.
Sweet Savage. And this wasn't garage days when they released that. It was early on when you're at Metallica shows and you're going like, wow, what is this music? And the really fascinating thing about it is it just sounded like Metallica to me. There wasn't like, when you play a cover, like, we would do a show and then at the end we do Rock Brigade. You knew it wasn't our song. It was just bigger and better, but these songs went right into the Metallica set list and just kind of sounded exactly to what they were doing, which is really wild.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, we were very flattered when we heard Metallica actually covered one of our songs. It's just
amazing. It's amazing.
One of the biggest bands in the world covers this little song that you wrote when you were 16.
Yeah. When you get snatched up by Dio, I'm sure I know the story, and I'm sure you've told the story, but I mean, look at this run that we get. Ozzy's out of Sabbath. He puts out, Blizzard and Diary. And then Dio is in Sabbath and he does Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. These are masterpiece 4 records. Then he splits off and does Holy Diver and Last in Line. Those 6 records are so mind-boggling to me. And they're all in like a 3-4 year period. It's insane. When you first get the, call, how does this happen? You get a call and, hey, do you want to come audition? They heard of you. How does this happen?
Yeah. Jimmy Bain, the aforementioned Dio bass player, Jimmy had a band called Wild Horses back in the UK with Brian Robertson, actually, after Robbo had left Thin Lizzy. So they did a couple records or more for EMI in the late 1970s, early 80s. And so Wild Horses came over to do a bunch of shows in Ireland. And Sweet Savage, we basically opened for any rock band that came to Ireland. There was only 2 real rock bands in Ireland. There was us and a band called Mama's Boys. They were a 3-piece, 3 brothers, the McManus brothers. So we ended up opening shows for Wild Horses. That's when I first met Jimmy Bain. And so I guess Jimmy kind of heard me play and kind of took note. And interestingly, my father was also called Vivian. So very unusual name for a guy, even in Ireland. I mean, there was one other male Vivian that I knew in all of my time in Ireland. So it was a pretty unusual name. But so when Ronnie and Vinny Appice went over to London to look for a guitar player, Ronnie wanted a UK style guitar player as opposed to the American super shredder.
Right.
He wanted
Eddie Van Halen's.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of technically brilliant guitar players in the US at that time. But Ronnie wanted, he played with Iommi, he played with Ritchie Blackmore. He wanted more of that British sound, more of that blues based, I guess, where we bend strings a lot more. So he went over to London. And Vinny tells me the story that they landed in London and they got out like the New Musical Express and Sounds and Melody Making, all the papers they used to have back then, the music papers that came out every week. And they just look in the classifieds and see who was playing, and they'd go out to clubs and in the hope that, they'd find a guitar player. It's like a bit of a scattershot approach. And in fact, Vinny said there's one night, like right after they got there, they said, oh, that sounds like, I can't remember the name of the band, but they went to see the band thinking it was like a hard rock band and they were a reggae act. So it's like, okay, that's not the guitar player. But anyway, so they called Jimmy, because Ronnie had played with Jimmy in Rainbow, the very early version of Rainbow Rising and whatnot. And they said, Jimmy, do you know any guitar players? And Jimmy recommended to myself and John Sykes, I don't know what the deal was with John Sykes, if they met with him or talked to him or didn't or whatever. But I know that they had no way to get in touch with me. Jimmy knew my name and he knew I lived in Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland phone book was about that thick. You know, there's
Whoa.
like
Nobody.
10 pages. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it was the late night or the early 1980s. So my father was listed in the phone book as Vivian Campbell. So
This is
if
crazy.
we didn't have the same name, they would never have found me. So they
Wow.
called, and Jimmy actually, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was still living like you do in Ireland. You still live with your family till you go get married or leave home for whatever reason. So 2 o'clock in the morning, and my father came around, woke me up and said, "There's a drunken Scotsman on the phone for you."
Wow.
So I went downstairs and took the call, and it was Jimmy, and he was in a hotel room in London with Ronnie and Vinny, and they were drinking, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they said, "Can you come over to London?" And I said, "Sure." Well, when do you need me? Well, like tomorrow, you know. So
Whoa.
now my father, again, going back to him being such a great supporter of me and really helping me live my dream. I didn't have the money for a plane ticket. So despite him being woken at 2 o'clock in the morning, he bought me the plane ticket the next morning to fly to London
Wow.
to audition. So I just had my guitar, the aforementioned 72987 Les Paul.
Yeah.
And I went over and we went into a rehearsal place called John Henry's, which is a big rehearsal facility in North London. And I borrowed a Marshall head from them and I plugged into it with my Les Paul. And Ronnie had most of the song Holy Diver written at that
Right.
stage. And so he kind of showed me the you know, the bits.
And
We
he's
kind
on bass showing you?
yeah, Ronnie played
Right.
a bit of bass
Right.
guitar.
I
Yeah,
remember,
he
yeah.
showed me on bits. And then that was it. Then we kind of jammed on that like forever. And the solo section, like when it came to playing solos, and I still have this cassette tape somewhere in a box. I've got so many
Oh,
boxes because I've
yeah.
moved so much in recent years, but somewhere in one of these boxes, there's a cassette tape of my audition. And I
Whoa.
remember listening to it with Ronnie a year or two later after the fact. And when it came time to the solo part, I was just playing and playing and playing. And Ronnie was rolling a joint in the corner of the room. And I'd
Yeah.
look over at Ronnie and he'd go like, you know,
Yeah.
keep going, keep going.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I'm going, shit, because I, you know, like every guitar kid, you've got all your fancy licks. And they're
Yeah.
the ones I do
You've ran
first.
them all.
Yeah, whittly, 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 all the fucking notes, you know, all the notes, there's notes laying at my feet everywhere, all the notes I've dropped. Um, and he said, just keep playing, keep playing. And I'm running out of ideas. I think, shit, I got nothing left. So I start playing like really basic double stop Chuck Berry kind of stuff, like the really simple kind of stuff, because I'm thinking, because while I'm playing that, I'm trying to think, what can I do next that's kind of more exciting?
Yeah.
But it's when I listened to the cassette tape year or two after the fact with Ronnie, and he went mad. He pointed at the cassette player. He said, "That's it." He said, "When you started playing like that, that's when I knew you were the guitar player for me."
Wow.
But that was the moment I'd run out of ideas.
Oh.
That's when I was just treading water. And I think, fuck, I got to come up with something else. So it just goes to show you, you know, you think you're playing all your fancy bits, and really it's just a bunch of baloney. It's just a load of notes that don't mean anything.
Yeah.
And it's only when you start playing by feel, which I was, you know, I'm thinking, shit, I've got to play the simple stuff and try and just fill the time here, that you know, that's when the true essence of the player comes out, I guess, you know.
Does he hire you that day?
Yeah, that very night we finished that night, and he kind of explained to us what was going on. He says, "I've quit Black Sabbath with Vinny." He says, "I've got a record deal which they offered me as a solo artist, but he said, I don't want to be a solo artist. I want to have a band." He said, "However, I want to call it Dio for name recognition." I thought, okay, that makes sense.
Of course.
You know, you're not going to call it Campbell because nobody knows that.
Yeah.
So he said, you know, and he had Holy Diver, and he had half an idea for another song that turned out to be Don't Talk to Strangers. But other than that, we had to go to LA and write a record. So that's what we did the next month. I got a visa, flew to the States. It was my first time in America, and my first time in LA, and it was quite overwhelming. And we just went into a rehearsal room for about a month, and we just banged out song ideas. And then we were rehearsing in Sound City. We literally, it's across the courtyard. I mean, it was like a U shape, you know. On one side there was the the rehearsal rooms. On the other side, there was a recording studio. And in between, there were like some storage places. So we literally, it was one of the funniest things in my mind. I'll never forget the night that we moved from rehearsal into the studio. And here's Ronnie Dio, like pushing road cases across an empty parking lot, you know, and Vinny. And they were all like stoned. Like those guys smoked so much pot. They're like kids out there, you know, like, like riding around on the wheels of road cases, you know. Anyway, so yeah, and then the next day we started recording. We set up and in Studio A in Sound City and bashed out that record and did it in super quick time, you know.
Well, this had to be kind of an interesting time for you, because here you are, you're in Sweet Savage, and you know, you guys did some recording, but most of the stuff was kind of live stuff put together for like EPs and stuff. You're in a 24 track, you know, pro studio with a dude that is absolutely a legend. And now you need to learn to record, you know. I mean, that's not just something that you just, you know, people are like, you got an engineer in there. He's like, man, what are you doing? You know, like, was it crazy, or were you just a natural and just killing it?
No, it was crazy. It was a lot of stress. I mean, yeah, I was listening actually at the time when they called me and asked me if I could go to London to audition. I had a cassette in my car and it was Mob Rules. Oh. That's what I was listening to. And the other one was Heaven and Hell. And I was a big fan of Rainbow, like when Ronnie was with Rainbow,
of course.
You know, Long Live Rock and Roll, Rainbow Rising. So this guy was a total icon to me. I mean, I was very, very aware of who he was. So to all of a sudden be 20 years of age, be in LA for the first time in your life, be in a recording studio, you know, pretty much the first time, like certainly my first album, I'd been in the studio for maybe like 4 hours, you know, doing something, but I'd never done an album before. And to be playing with musicians of this caliber, Jimmy Bain and Vinny Appice and Ronnie James Dio, you know, it was just, I felt completely out of place, you know.
Oh my God.
What the hell am I doing here? Plus, when I got there, it wasn't until I got to LA that I realized how many great guitar players, technically great guitar players who were in LA. I mean, you were literally tripping over guitar players. Like I'd go out to clubs just to hear these bands and I'd hear these guys play, and it was just like mind blowing to me, because I'm thinking, how did they learn to play like that? The technique that the American players had was just so way beyond anything. I really wanted to play like that, but I couldn't, because I was self-taught, and I grew up dropping the needle on Rory Gallagher records and Thin Lizzy records and stuff, and playing by ear, and you know, my fingering was all wrong compared to those guys, and they picked really, really light, whereas I picked really heavy and pinch harmonics and palm muting and stuff. You know, all these habits that were ingrained in my DNA, you know, were impossible for me to shake. So there's no way I was ever going to play like Paul Gilbert or Yngwie Malmsteen or any of these cats.
Right.
So, and it was just very, very frustrating for me. And I couldn't get my head around, I could not for the life of me understand why Ronnie hired me instead of any of those guys. But I mean, I understand it now, but at the time I totally couldn't, you know. Because I was solely looking at it from the point of view of technique. Like those guys had so much more technique as players than I ever had or would ever have. And I just, you know, I'm thinking, why did you get the guy who can play like that, you know?
Well, I mean, the thing that's unique about you, and talking about Gary Moore, was I felt that your playing was violent. It was amazing. It had this.
It was angry. Yeah.
Yeah. It was angry. It had a punch in the face feel. And another amazing thing too, for being so, you know, young and green and coming into the studio, your tone was impeccable. It was unbelievable. I was like, wow, listen to this guy's tone and just the attack. It just blew me away when it comes out of the speakers, like stand up and shout, you know, that shit is radical, man. It's a you know, it just comes at you like, whoa.
Well, I mean, you know, I do agree with you. I mean, there is anger in my playing, and there always was. And I think that that's really the Gary Moore influence. Because like I say, everything Gary ever played, it was like, you know, really intense, like he really meant it. So I took that on board, and I always wanted to have that fiery element in my playing. And I think also, you know, it was part of growing up in Belfast in the 1970s. I mean, it was a rough time,
Right.
you know, so there was a lot of aggro there, you know, plus at the time when I was coming of age musically with Sweet Savage, when I was putting that band together, when we were writing songs like Killing Time and Take No Prisoners and whatnot, we were as much influenced by hard rock as we were by punk. I mean, the Sex Pistols had as much of an influence on us as Thin Lizzy did, you know, so it was kind of like this energy and this force that was there naturally in the environment and supplementally in the kind of music that we were growing up listening to and influenced by. So yeah, I get it now, but when I was 20 years old and in LA, I didn't have that perspective.
Right.
So it really did my head, and I couldn't figure out, you know, it was really a slap to my confidence. Like I thought I was a reasonable guitar player in Ireland, but as soon as I landed in LA, I was thinking, what the fuck? Why? You know, like there's hundreds of great guitar players here. Why did you come and hire me? But I get it now, you know. But
Well, I
then,
mean, it's the same reason in my eyes that Angus Young is just as great as Eddie Van Halen. Totally different players
yeah,
and totally different styles, but both incredible. And I do know this, from the day the Holy Diver record drops, immediately people are loving your guitar playing. So was your confidence building once you get out on tour and see it? No?
no, I didn't love my guitar playing. I really didn't. I mean, and uh, it's only in recent years, like literally probably within the last 10 years, that I actually can listen to my playing and go, okay, you know, I get what they heard, you know. But prior to, I'm my worst critic. I always have been, you know, I'm always down on my playing. And I think maybe it's the Virgo in me, you know, I want things to be perfect. And there's no such thing as being perfect in any aspect.
Especially in rock.
Yeah. I mean, you can't be. I mean, you capture a moment in time. That's all you're really doing, you know. And so anyway, yeah. So I find it a lot easier at this stage of my life to roll with things than I did back then. Back then, I was just, I do something and think, shit, that's really not very good, you know. So anyway.
Also, the interesting thing is, you know, Ronnie, you know, a lot like, let's say, Ozzy or anybody that was a solo singer, they always, it's what are the band going to come up with and you know, create musically wise. So now you're in this kind of pressure cooker of writing some tunes too. And by the time you get to the second record, the writing, look, of course, the first record's a masterpiece, but the second record really starts to gel with stuff like I Speed at Night and The Last in Line and Egypt, The Chains Are On. That kind of stuff just starts to sound like a band, you know?
Yeah, we were really gelling as a band at that point, because there'd been not a lot of time between records, and we'd been on the road in that time in between, pretty much, you know, playing shows. So we really, like with any band, you know, the more shows you play, the more it comes together and the more the chemistry of the band gels. But there was a chemistry to that band, even going back to that first night in the rehearsal room. There were, as soon as we started playing Ronnie's original idea for the song Holy Diver, I mean, that it was intense, like right from the very first note. It's like, oh my God, this sounds really, really, really good.
Yeah.
You know, it was just like Jimmy Bain. I mean, you know, you think he was just the bass player, whatever, and just he was a very simple player, but man, he had such a tone, he had such a sound, and his timing was impeccable. I mean, he just the feel and just that was the first time he played with Vinny that night. It was the first time any of us had played together.
Wow.
And it just like it give us all goosebumps like right away. So it was no real surprise, I suppose. You know, Ronnie said that night, you know, this is it. We're going to go to LA. We're going to make a record. This is the band kind of thing. So it actually took me a decade or two after that to realize just how good the band was, because then after that, you know, I played with Whitesnake for a little while, you know, and I played with a few other people in different situations, and it's good and all, but it never really had that immediacy, that chemistry of the original Dio band. I mean, that was very, very unique that
Well,
happened.
it's totally so rare. I mean, so rare. That's why I always talk about the Ozzy and Randy and those guys that played on those records. And then the Sabbath, and then you guys, perfect example. You put Whitesnake, Kalogner's there. He's cherry picking the great dudes. Here's the super group. And yeah, the record was a fucking smasher, but it doesn't mean that the band behind the scenes or even on stage, the feel of you up there going, we're not really, we're playing the tunes and we sound like the record, but we're not gelling, and that's a big difference. Gelling compared to knowing the song note for note,
Yeah. Well, Vinny Appice always described it very well. It's as much the space in between the notes as the notes themselves. You got it. And again, that goes back to Jimmy's playing as well. It's the way that it breathes. It's when you're not playing, that can be equally as important as when you are playing. So just that whole overall feeling. When you get a band that breathes in sync with each other, it's really quite amazing. But I still play with Vinny to this day with Last in Line, and it's still a joy. Our mutual friend Phil Suzanne is playing bass. That was our connection here for this. Speaking of which, Phil told me you're a car guy.
Oh God, I love cars. And he said you love cars also. I did read. I think that when you first got in Dio, did you get like a Porsche 911?
No, I bought a Ferrari 308 GTB.
Oh, Magnum PI, awesome. What color?
With the roof. The Magnum PI had the S version. I went for the coupe.
Yeah,
the roofline. I had that.
What color?
It was like a burgundy metallic. I can't remember what the Ferrari speak is for the color.
Right.
But it was an itch I had to scratch. I wanted a Ferrari, and I got it, and I had it for a couple of years and sold it. It was fun, but I'm a Porsche guy. Like as soon as I drove a 911, I've been a solid Porsche guy ever since.
That's all it is for me. It's 964s RS Americas. It's 993s. It's 80s. G cars. It's the new 992. I love that car because if somebody rear ends it, you just go get another one. These Texter stoners, these vintage ones are too tough to drive now because the price has just gone through the damn roof. But
I got rear-ended in one of mine. I have amongst the cars, I have a 1970 911T hot rod, and I got rear-ended by a drunk driver in LA in January. I literally just got the car out of storage, and I'd driven about 2 blocks. And I got so I know exactly what you mean with regard to that. Yeah,
I can't take it. I can't take it. That's an interesting question too for me. On you're in, because I've had guys that played with Ozzy and stuff, or were, Lynch was talking about an audition and stuff. He was offered like $250 a week to play in Ozzy. He said, I'll keep my liquor store delivery job or whatever. But when you get into Dio, and I know you don't have to give a number or anything, but once he says you're 20, do you go, so what's the money? Or do you just go, fuck yeah, rock and roll?
The money was pretty grim. I mean, the thing, and that was the whole reason why I got fired from Dio, because I was the squeaky wheel. That night in London, in that rehearsal room, when Ronnie sat us down and said, here's the plan, this is what we're going to do. He had promised us all that by the 3rd record, it would be an equity situation, because basically we had to work for next to nothing for the earlier records. And the only reason I bought a Ferrari was with 3 reasons. Number one, it was a common or garden variety, the cheapest one. Number two, the exchange rate when I bought it, I was getting paid in dollars, and the exchange rate was very, very favorable to buy sterling at that time. And number 3, I ate crew meal for years. I didn't spend a penny. Like anything I earned, like my per diems or whatever, went right into a bank account, into I'm going to buy a car. Because at the time I was still living with my parents in Ireland. So when I wasn't working with Dio, I'd fly home. I'd be like, hey mom, hey dad, I'm back. So I didn't have any overhead. I had no bills. Wow. So I kept everything. It was like that same, like years earlier when I was saving up to buy a Gibson Les Paul, I just focused on it, and I wanted a 308 GTB Ferrari. So I saved up for a few years and got it. But no, the money situation in Dio was really bleak. We earned less than the crew, you know.
Whoa.
Um,
Whoa.
and so and we didn't get any of those records. We got none of the T-shirts. We got none of the ticket sales. We got none of the record sales.
No,
But
no, no writer.
we were working towards that promise, which was by the third album, it would be an equity situation, and that's when we started working on the third record. That's when I started going, "Hey, Ronnie, you got a moment?"
Yeah.
and he kept pushing off, and then eventually they fired me, But I was a squeaky wheel, and it was less a matter of the money. I mean, yeah, it would have been nice to get paid for that, but it's more principle. I'm big on principle. I mean, when somebody looks me in the eye and shakes my hand, and we have a gentleman's agreement, I uphold my end of the deal, and I expect the same of people. I mean, maybe I'm an idealist or an idiot for expecting that of human beings, but that's what I put out, and that's what I give, and that's what I expect from people. And so, it was a question of principle, much more so than it was a question of dollars with me.
Right.
That the promise was made, and that the rest of us toiled for several years in the belief that that contract would be fulfilled, and it never was. And ultimately Ronnie never told Wendy, and Wendy was, his estranged wife, but his manager, and therefore by default the band's manager, but she never saw it as being a band. He never kind of explained that aspect to her.
Right.
She always saw Ronnie Dio kind of like Ozzy Osbourne. It didn't matter who was behind him,
Right.
but Ronnie should have known better. I mean, the magic of that original band, that's kind of where I really had a beef with Ronnie. He knew how good that band was. And, for him to be so fearful of Wendy that he wouldn't even have the balls to tell her that, this is what I want. This is what I promised the guys. This is what we're going to do. She just kind of went, no, you're the star. You don't need them, get somebody else to play guitar. And you can, guitar players are a dime a dozen, but, some of
songwriters aren't. Songwriters aren't.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the key things. When you're talking about like, oh yeah, he could have got Paul Gilbert or Yngwie. There's some guys that can't write, and Paul Gilbert's a friend of mine. He's fantastic, but there's some people that can't write certain types of rock songs. There's a thing that a lot of the burners can't do. And that's why Eddie Van Halen is the greatest of all time, because he was the trifecta. The guy could sing, play, and write. Yeah, and, and a million other things too. It looked great, and his vibe, and his guitar, everything. But, when you went in and you were writing these songs, are you not getting any songwriting from it?
I wrote some songs in the Holy Diver record, but I was coerced to sign over my publishing.
Gotcha. I got you. Okay.
So it's like, yeah.
I don't want to dig too far into that, because we all know the story. There was, anger and wars over years and ill blood and all that. I was just trying to get to the fact of how you bought a Ferrari back then, you know what I mean?
Because I didn't fucking eat for 3 years.
And you know what? That's the
literally
same fucking mentality I have. If people see me with something, they go, look at this fucking rich douchebag. And I'm like, nah, what you don't understand is I would sleep in my car to get something that I want, that means the world to me. There's no wealth here at all. My entire life, I've been pretty, blue collar or broke or grinding or an artist, but I've been lucky to learn how to flip and work hard and do stuff to get to the level you want to get to,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you have a dream, you just go for it, like
Totally.
I wanted the Gibson Les Paul. I worked like a mofo to get it,
Yeah.
and I wanted to use 308 GTB Quattro Valvo, and I didn't need to get it. So
how many Porsches you got now?
I got a dozen at the moment.
Awesome. What do you got?
This is a late life obsession with me. I had a cancer diagnosis back in 2013. Yeah. And ever since then, I thought, this life is short. So I'm just going to go for what I want here. And I've made a few deals. It's kind of like horse trading, they come and they go. And on some of them, I lose a little money. And then others, I've been really fortunate. I've made a lot of money, and that's allowed me to get something else, So I have a couple nice ones. I got, my oldest one is a 56.
Wow.
and my most recent one is a 2018 GT3.
Oh,
You
I
know,
love the GT3, dude. I
oh
just
yeah.
drove the new GT3 on the track.
I
3
haven't had
weeks
the
ago.
992 GT3. I just that double wishbone suspension at the
I,
front, man, that looks just planted the way
that,
that thing.
yeah, there's a video of me driving it on the track on YouTube. I'll send it over to you. But you know, it's interesting. I drove a GT2 last year pretty hard on the track, and that thing spins out kind of easy. You're thinking, I
Yeah.
got traction control and I got all. Nah,
Mm.
it doesn't matter. This fucking car is going to bite you. And
Yeah.
the tires were cold a couple weeks ago, and I was driving the new GT3, and it got away from me also. But it's, you know, the tires were cold and it was freezing out. But man, what a car. I'm so into the new ones now because I just like to get in and go. You know, I do love the old ones and I loved them all my life. But I just worry whenever they're worth that much money, I just know there's bad people out there.
Yeah, yeah, you got to drive very defensively. You know, New Hampshire here, not like California, you can't drive year round. So um, I actually just took a car out of storage this morning for the first time because the weather, it's cold as heck here, but the roads are clear. There's no salt in the roads. The sun is shining, but it's still only about 30 something degrees. But
Yeah.
I have a 58 Speedster that I just took out of the garage this morning.
Whoa.
Um, and I needed a little help from my brother-in-law to get her started, but she fired up. And actually, when I'm done talking to you, I'm going to take her out and go drive up and down the coast for a while. But yeah, you have to be very careful of other drivers for sure.
Oh,
I'm
man.
a naturally defensive driver. I'm
Yeah.
always looking like
Same
that guy.
here.
Is he
Same
going to
here.
pull out in front of me? Is that bicyclist going to pull into
Yeah.
my lane? You know, so yeah, you have to do that. But yeah, so yeah, I love driving as much as I love cars. I got into rally driving during COVID,
Wow.
which is something I always wanted to do. You know, but I never really had time because you know, last 7, 8 years, 9 years of my life since I started the Last in Line band, I've been so busy. When I wasn't working with Def Leppard, I was working with Last in Line. When I wasn't working with Last in Line, I was working with Def Leppard. It's just go, 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 go. And then COVID came along and everything shut down. So all of a sudden I had time on my hands to play with cars and joined the local track, did a lot of driver's ed at the local
Oh,
track, and then realized that one of the world's preeminent rally schools, Team O'Neill, is a couple hours north of where I live. So I went up there in December 2020 and I did their 5-day course, and it's the most fun I've ever had in a car. And then I went back the next month and did it, and then the following month, and so on and so forth. And then eventually they said to me, stop coming to our rally school, enter a rally. So I
wow.
entered a rally, little regional rally, did great. And then they said, yeah, you should really enter a national rally. So I entered a national rally last summer. The New England Forest Rally was my first national, had my first rollover crash. So
Oh,
I don't
really?
ever want to do that again. Well,
Whoa.
they say in rally, it's not a question of if, but when,
Right,
you know?
right.
So I'm glad I ticked the box early because now I know I don't have to do that again.
Whoa.
So that was interesting. And then, yeah, so I've been doing pretty much one a month ever since. And
Wow.
that's great fun. So I rent a Subaru for that, Subaru Impreza. That
Oh,
I
I
donate.
love Subaru. I had the WRX STI 2 years ago, the hyper blue one. What a car.
Oh,
What a
they're
car.
vicious little cars, yeah. So that's it. So rally is great fun, man. Going around a track is great fun, but going sideways through the forest is
Oh, that's
just
the best, man. Now, when you play Vegas, you got to hit me up, and you and I'll fly out and I'll go see Def Leppard, and you and I will go to dream racing during the day and hit the track and drive all these supercars.
oh lovely. Oh,
Yeah,
that'll
they got them all, and my buddy owns it, and he's a former, you know, F1 racer, and man, it would be great to have it. I'll tell you a funny story. My guitar player in my band, speaking of Porsches, he picked you up. He worked at Mesa Boogie back in the '80s and picked you up in a red Porsche years ago. And he worked at Boogie. He had brought you the boogies and stuff. So
Ah,
a long time ago, man.
yeah. No, it was a whole lifetime ago when I lived in LA. I mean, it's only been about 4 years since I left LA, but
Yeah.
uh, yeah, when I think about it, I mean, most of my life was there. And it does seem like a dream. Like, oh, when was that, you know?
Let's talk about Def Leppard. So you get in '92. And after the White Snake run, and you've been in every since. And this is the 13th album coming out, which is pretty wild. 13 albums. I'm a massive Def Leppard fan from, of course, the first four. High and Dry, I believe, is one of the greatest records ever made. And that is, I'll go to the grave with that. And I love all kinds of music, dude. I listen to everything, but High and Dry is a goddamn masterpiece.
Yeah.
But I saw you guys about 3 years ago at the Garden with Journey, at a Madison Square Garden. I was living in New York, and you guys were fucking incredible, man. I mean, incredible. I don't know what Joe Elliott did, but there were years where his voice was a little south. And now I don't know if he had surgery on his vocal cords, like laser off nodes or whatever, but this guy's unbelievable.
Yeah, Joe's singing better than ever the last several years. Joe had a little bit of a scare around 2015 or 2016, something like that. His voice was getting weak, and he wasn't confident in it, and we actually had to cancel a few shows to give him some time to recover. And it was at that point that Joe kind of went back to the drawing board and basically retaught himself how to sing again. He put a lot of work into working with a vocal coach, a guy called Roger Love, that I had actually worked with years before I joined Def Leppard. And Roger's been working with Joe on and off for over 30 years. But so they started doing an intense regime, like pretty much every day for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And still to this day, before a show, Joe starts this whole warm-up process by like early or mid-afternoon at the latest. And so he really, it's a lot of hard work, but he's discovered that it's worth it because it's made him very robust, and roadworthy. And like, that high note in the chorus of Photograph, that's a high E.
Oh,
there's not many men that can sing up there with that kind of power. Joe's got like this really, really super, super strong falsetto voice that doesn't, like most people's falsettos, like my falsetto is all airy, it's like, there's not a lot of note to it. Whereas Joe's falsetto is like piercing, like laser. It's a big, big, big note. So he's really, really robust in that way. He's a very, very strong singer. And we're all proud of him that he's come back stronger than ever,
Is he do warm down also? I mean, since I stopped singing, a lot of singers do this warming down now.
Yeah, I think Joe's warm down is a whiskey.
I love it. Yeah.
But no, I've heard of singers doing that, but I've never witnessed Joe doing that unless he's very discreet about it. But I haven't witnessed him having a whiskey after a show. So,
did you have to audition to get into Def Leppard? I can't remember. It was so long ago.
It was less of an audition and more of a getting to know each. It was like a courtship, I knew Joe. Joe was actually the only one that I knew prior to joining the band because Joe still lives in Dublin. That's his principal home. And, we had a lot of mutual friends in Dublin. So every time I was in Dublin, I'd see Joe, I'd either be in a dinner situation or whatever where Joe was there. And so we kind of knew each other. And when Joe would come to LA, he'd call me to get a soccer game, like a pickup game on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I was his LA football connection. So we knew each other socially. We'd never played music together, but obviously he knew I could play guitar. He knew I'd been in Dio and Whitesnake and whatnot, River Dogs. And I knew the kind of guy that Joe was. I mean, I knew he's like real salt of the earth, friendly, easygoing guy. And then about a year after Steve had passed away, Joe called me up and said that the band was going to be in LA and that they'd finished the Adrenalize record just with Phil playing guitar, but for the tour they wanted to continue as a 5-piece band and get another guitar player. And so Joe had said, I put your name forward, you're my choice for Def Leppard. And he said there's a couple other guys we're talking to, but he says I think you're the guy for the band. So I immediately agreed with him. I said, yes, I am totally the guy for the band. And I felt it. I felt it in my soul because I was such a Def Leppard fan from like way, way, way before the first album. I had the first single, Get Your Rocks Off. I had the Wasted single. I had the first album, I had the second album, I had Paramania, I had Hysteria. I was so aware of Def Leppard because when I was back in Sweet Savage, back in Belfast in 1979, 1980, whatever, we'd be reading about this band Def Leppard. We'd be hearing them on Radio 1 on John Peel's show where they
Yeah.
first got played. So they were like Leopard were like the band that did it. Like Leopard and Iron Maiden was like, okay, we've got to follow whatever roadmap, whatever it is these guys are doing. They're our idols, so we're going to learn from the steps that they take. So I was so invested in Def Leppard's early career, even though I wasn't part of Def Leppard, you know, and then I was a fan of the band and the music. And I always thought that Def Leppard was, you know, head and shoulders above every other hard rock band in terms of songwriting and ambition, and vocal prowess. So I was just a huge fan, you know, and I knew Joe. And so when Joe called me and said, I think you'd be perfect for Def Leppard, I actually did agree with him without being conceited. I thought, you know what? I absolutely would be perfect for that band. And what they didn't know, and what Joe didn't even know at the time, was that I'd been working on my vocals for years prior to that. So, because even back when I was with Dio, I wanted to sing because I always admired singers. And, you know, to work with Ronnie Dio, it's like, yeah, I'd be playing, I'd be listening and thinking, wow, this guy can sing the phone book. It's just so amazing. And I went up to Ronnie and I said, can I sing background vocals? And he went, no. He said, he literally is wagging his finger like this. He says, Richie Blackmore didn't sing. Tony Iommi didn't sing. You're not singing. Play your guitar. Okay, you know, but that's what Ronnie was like. You know, he's really like, no, like he was laying down the law. You're not singing. Don't even
rules of rock. You know.
But then when I was with Whitesnake, you know, David Coverdale was really encouraging. I mean, super encouraging of my singing and gave me a lot of tips, you know, turned me onto his vocal coach for a while. But so I'd been working with this vocal coach, Roger Love, that I told you Joe's been working with since his recovery. And so that was really, you know, I'd been with a lot of different vocal coaches, but whatever it was Roger was teaching really worked for me. So when I went into the rehearsal room to play with Leppard for the first time, they were all pretty surprised that I could sing as strongly as I could, you know. So that was, you know, like a little something extra. I mean, they knew I could play guitar, but it was mostly just getting to know each other and getting to know each other's personalities, because Leppard is such a unique band that it wasn't just about playing or singing or songwriting or whatever. It really has to be a personality fit, you know. So Joe knew me and he knew that I'd fit in the band, but the other guys didn't know me. I didn't know them. And to be honest, you know, I was, in the back of my mind, there's a little bit of something with me too. You know, I'd been in Dio, I'd gotten fired. I'd been in Whitesnake, I'd gotten fired. Part of me was like, do I really want to get involved with another band? But then I knew the sort of person that Joe is. And I thought, well, if they're all like Joe, you know, just like it's a different kind of thing. And you know, they're not all like Joe. We're not all the same, but there is a different collective mindset in Def Leppard that doesn't exist in any other band, whereas we all capitulate to the music and the greater good of the band. We all understand that it's not about any of us or our egos. It's about what we collectively create, and the music and the songs and the music will outlive all of us, you know. And when people think of the band Def Leppard, they think of the music. They don't necessarily think of the personalities, you know, whereas certain bands, in particular American rock bands, you have very strong personalities and these characters. You know, when people think of Motley Crue, for example, who we're going to tour with this summer, they maybe think of Nikki Sixx or Tommy Lee, you know, we're like these big personalities and like rock stars, you know. Whereas when you think of Def Leppard, you think of the music, you know, more than you think of, oh, who plays guitar in Def Leppard.
A lot like Foreigner, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Big time. Foreigner is one of those bands, you know, that it's all about the songs. Now, when you come in 92, you get the gig. You got to be like me. You're like, all right, what are we playing off the, you know, On Through the Night? What are we playing off High and Dry? And they're like, nah, here you go. Are you just like, whoa, what? You know, I mean, because look, I love this band to death and I understand the 3 generations of fans and I understand the hits, but it was always weird to me that they abandoned those incredible roots. And I get it. It's such a different band after Hysteria completely, that almost when you do play High and Dry and stuff like that, it sticks out. to the average fan would be like, what is this?
Yeah.
But what was that like when you got in?
Well, you're beholden to the hits,
Yeah,
so
I
I
get it.
think we all understand that. Um, and it's nice to go deep on a tour and play some obscure album cut that you haven't played in a while, or a throwback, like Rock Brigade or something. But
Yeah,
you've got to appease the majority of Def Leppard fans, and the majority of Def Leppard fans want to hear the big songs.
I
So,
get it. I
so
get it.
you've got to play them. But every now and again, like when we do a Vegas residency, we get to go deep on stuff. But back, talking about High and Dry, in 2002 or 2003, we had an album out called X, and we were on the American tour for that album. And genius here being me, I said, hey, why don't we open the show with side one of High and Dry?
Whoa.
And Phil went, yeah, let's do it. So I don't know why the other guys went along with it, but it died. I mean, it's like we started playing it, and like 30% of the audience maybe were like really excited, like, oh my God, they're playing High and Dry in sequence.
Yeah.
And the rest of the audience were going, what the fuck is this shit?
Wow.
And it
Wow.
wasn't until we got to Bringing on the Heartbreak where people
Yeah.
actually went, the majority of people went, oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
The rest
It's
of the
like
time they're going to get a beer.
it's like Journey. When I see Journey, I want to hear the whole Infinity record, So I get it. I mean, I'm not stupid, and I understand how the business is, and this band is massive. I understand it. But it would be cool one time to just see the High and Dry record top to bottom at this era in say a club, like a special night. But those are the kind of dreams I have where, the Stones, they come through and they do, oh, tonight we're doing Exile. And the true fans, you put it on the ticket, you go, hey, because, look, everybody uses that old farewell tour thing. Well, that's kind of burning out now. Here's what you do. You go, we're playing in Vegas, and on Thursday, we're doing the High and Dry record and then hits. On Friday, we're doing the Pyromania record and then some hits. And I'm willing to bet that people fucking fly out for all 3 nights of that,
Oh yeah, no, that absolutely would be great. It's a lot of work for us.
It is. I get it. And it challenges the musician again now.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot of work to go into that nuance, to go back in with the level of detail that we bring to our songs and our shows, to actually go back in and learn all of that. Some of it's real easy, like, off Pyromania, Photograph. Yeah, we play that every show, but Billy's Got a Gun. I mean, that's what we're going to kind of blow the cobwebs off of that one,
Yeah.
So. But yeah, it would be great. And that's the joy of playing a Vegas residency, is that you get to write the rules. It's not like a conventional show, because that people are going to fly in from around the globe. And if they're willing to do that, they're diehard fans. So you want to give them something different, something special, other than the usual touring show,
Yeah.
So that's definitely.
Yeah, I think Cheap Trick recently did it where they didn't play one same song each night. I mean, God, that's so much. I get it. That's a lot of work. I'm a comedian now. And if somebody said, hey, do these jokes from 2012, I would have to go back and listen to it. And oh my God, the amount of work it would take to remember them, and the flow and the nuances, it's the same thing, but yeah, I get it. I'm just such a High and Dry addict, it's just a crushing record. I do love the new song a lot, Kick. It's got the obvious T-Rex flavor there, and I know Joe is a giant T-Rex thing. Everything Joe does on the side is T-Rex influenced and everything.
Oh yeah. Well, so I mean, Mark Bolan was my first hero too. I mean, before Rory Gallagher, when I was literally 9 years old, I think it was the first, a show called Top of the Pops. It was on for 30 or 40 minutes on a Thursday evening, and my sister's a year and change older than me, and she was really into T-Rex, and she had a couple of the singles. So I remember the first time I heard it, and the first time I saw Bolan on TV, that's when I had a light bulb moment, and I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to grow my hair and wear my sister's clothes, So fortunately I couldn't fit into my sister's clothes, but I did grow my hair, curly like Bolan. But yeah, so I didn't realize that Joe and I had that in common until 30 years ago in my first tour with Def Leppard, we were doing press together, and Joe and I were sat down somewhere in Europe, and the one of the questions, one of the first questions they asked was, well, what, when you were really, really young, what was the very first thing that got you into rock and roll and where you knew that was going to be your life? And I said, Mark Bolan, Top of the Pops, 1971. And Joe said, me too. So it was like, it was one of those sort of things. Wow. But yeah, going back to this new song, Kick, it's from the album Diamond Star Halos, which is a line from Get It On Back Again. I mean, it's right. All, when we were first doing this record, we were doing it all remotely, the entire thing. So and we're all on different continents. I'm on the East Coast, Phil's on the West Coast of America, Sav's in England, Joe's in Ireland. In fact, Joe was in Spain, I think, for a lot of it. And, so we weren't in similar time zones. So it's not like we picked up the phone and talked to each other. We were all emailing. And I remember at some point, one of the songs we were working on really, really reminded me of the early 1970s and like that whole Top of the Pops era when we were really being heavily influenced by the music we were listening to. And I remember putting that in an email and Sav writing back saying, I was thinking exactly the same thing. He says, this record sounds so 1970s to me. And I think that's what inspired the title. Phil came up with the title Diamond Star Halo. So we were all in that similar mindset, of it kind of reminding us of our youth in a lot of ways, but we didn't set out to make a record like that. It just kind of, it naturally happened that the more we were doing the record, the more we were thinking, hang on, this got some juicy 1970s parts to it,
That's excellent. That's excellent. Now, who produced it?
We're self-produced. We have a very clever technician called Ronan McHugh, who lives in Dublin. And so basically we send Ronan a piece of shit and he polishes it and makes it sound like a great record. So yeah, he's a very talented chap. But so, yeah, we produced the record with Ronan.
Let me ask you about when you got sick, because I got diabetes like 5 years ago, and I kind of knew right away. I was on stage and I was the type of guy that always felt great. I was never a guy that was really sick or anything. So I knew immediately on stage that something was wrong with me and it wasn't going away that night. So I went to the hospital, got diagnosed, had diabetes. I've gotten rid of it since by diet and working out. I didn't have type 1, I had type 2, but was there a point where you started to feel sick, or how did this happen for you?
Yeah, it was about 2 years and I knew something was wrong with me and I kept going to my doctor and, doctor said, sometimes these things linger, but I was on tour. I remember I was in Australia with Leppard and it was November or something. And this would have been November 2011. And I you get sick when you're on the road, you get run down and you're more susceptible to stuff. So I had like a bit of a head cold thing. It wasn't like full on knock you down, but I had something going on and I saw the rock doc and they give you antibiotics and you take the course of antibiotics. But as soon as I finished taking the antibiotics, it came back again. And then like a couple of months later, we're in England touring. I get exactly the same symptoms. I see the rock doc. He gives me more antibiotics. I get back to LA. I go see my doctor. He says, well, sometimes these things linger. Here's more antibiotics. I go back and see my doctor a couple of months later because I get the same sort of rundown feeling. And I started to cough a lot. And he said, well, I'll send you to see a respiratory doctor down the street. So I went to the respiratory doctor. He gives me an inhaler. I go, really? Okay. He says, here's a nasal spray and an inhaler. Wow. So, and I keep going back like every month to this respiratory doctor and the cough kind of ebbs and flows, but it never goes away. And, the low level sickness, I kind of comes and goes. And I knew something else was going on. I kept saying to this doctor, just get, can you x-ray me or something? See what's going on? No, you'll be fine here. Take this stronger inhaler, come back in a month. And eventually one day I went in there after doing this for about 10 months and I said, look, I said, I don't care. Like, do I have to pay you x-ray? I just give me a chest x-ray. So finally they give me a chest x-ray and the doctor comes in with the x-ray and he's going, He says, so, do you have anywhere to be in a hurry? Because I'd like to get you a PET scan this afternoon. And I said, no, let's do it. So I go do the scan. And then that night he calls me up and he says, I'm going to have you talk to an oncologist tomorrow morning. And so like right then I was like, oh my God, it's just oncology, cancer, like what the hell is going on? So, but in a way, I was really glad that I was going to finally solve the mystery. And I went to the oncologist and they said, oh, we're going to do a biopsy on you next week. So I did the biopsy, and then they said you got, Hodgkin's lymphoma. But no, I caught it early. I was stage 2B, which is pretty early, but I could have caught it.
Yeah.
I think
ten
if
months earlier.
if I had been more proactive, instead of like these guys go to medical school, you sort of defer to them and think, well, they must know better than me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, nobody knows your body better than yourself. So that did make me a much stronger advocate for personal health. That you got to just kind of be a bit of a ball buster and go in there and say, look, I want an x-ray. I'll pay you $500 or whatever the fuck, just do it because it'll make me feel better, but that was it. So then I did chemo, and 6 months of hardcore chemo, lost all my hair, cancer came back, and then they sent me to another doctor and so on and so forth. So it's been a bit of a journey, but last almost 7 years, I've been doing immunotherapy.
Yeah.
And that's been really easy. It's like going to Jiffy Lube, you just.
What is that? Yeah, I know you had stem cell, right?
It's an infusion. I did stem cell. That didn't work either.
Wow.
I did the what they call the autologous stem cell transplant, where it's my own cells, where they take them out and then they put them back in you. So that didn't work. An option is to do a donor stem cell thingy, but that's much more involved, much more complicated, and could potentially kill you. So it didn't sound like a good option. The odds they give me didn't sound good. But anyway, so there's a load of different alternative treatments, and combination therapies and stuff like that. So I'm not worried about it. I've never actually, other than that first couple of weeks when you first learn you have cancer and it's like, oh my God, life's over. Other than that, I kind of learned how to roll with it, and I didn't give it too much energy. I've never really, obsessed on it and thought, woe is me, I have cancer, it's going to kill me. I've never actually thought it's going to kill me. I'm stubborn and I'm Irish, and I've always thought, fuck you, cancer, you're not going to get me. So that's kind of the mindset I have. I never stopped working. I'm very thankful to my bandmates in Leopard that they allowed me to work, even when I was really on the ropes, so to speak, a couple of times when it was like, oh, I don't know if it was going to be able to make the show tonight, but we got away with it, because I also take immense pride in my work, and the thought of bringing in someone else to sub for me never sits well with me, because I always know that they'll never do anywhere near as good a job as I'm going to do, because I just have that work ethic and I want to be perfect.
Yeah.
Even though we've already discussed I'm never going to be, but I want to go with that mindset and try to attain that, so, but it's been good, because I think that focus to just keep working and not capitulate to the disease and not obsess about it, just kind of push it off to the side and just deal with it as you need to, I think that kind of helped me a lot.
So what's the therapy you're doing? I interrupted you with this.
Immunotherapy. It's so I was part of a clinical trial for that for the first 2 years. Taking a drug called pembrolizumab. So it's like a chemo. It's like chemo light. You just go into hospital, they test your blood, you consult with the oncologist, and then they write up the drug orders and they give you an infusion that takes an hour or so. So it's really easy, and then the side effects are minimal, for me at least. I mean, some people get more intense side effects, but I've found that I'm pretty well suited to it. So anyway, I've been doing that for a lot of years. It's time to start looking at other alternatives, because it only lasts for so long. But again, there's plenty of options. There's a lot of new stuff coming down the pipeline every year. So it's and North America, we're very fortunate here to have some great doctors and great hospitals. So and I got a job, so I can afford healthcare. So I'm very fortunate,
Yeah.
I don't brush that under the rug. And I know there's a lot of people who are less fortunate than me in this world. So I'm very, very thankful to be in that position where I can afford to address the issue,
Yeah. Let's get into it. You're about to kick off a massive summer tour that's been pushed, obviously, because of COVID. Joan Jett, Poison, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, huge stadium tour. When do you guys start rehearsing this, and who makes the set list?
We start rehearsing. Normally, we don't rehearse much in recent years because we tour so much. We just need a couple of days to get back in the stride. However, because it'll be 2.5 years at least since we played together. We've put aside about 2-3 weeks to rehearse.
Wow.
I tend to think though we're going to go in there and after 2 or 3 days it's going to be like, okay, let's go to the pub.
Yeah.
So we're starting rehearsals in May, second week in May, and the set list, it kind of, it sort of decides itself, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. And especially because this is a 4-band bill. I mean, we'll play for 90 minutes. Motley will play for 90 minutes. Poison will probably play for 60 minutes. Joan Jett will maybe play for 40, 45. So, it's not like we can play 3 hours and put.
Of course.
Those. Of course. And again, you're beholden to the hits. But having said that, we do have a new album out and we do want to feature the new album. So we'll definitely be playing 1 or 2 new songs. We'll also try and do something a little bit different. I mean, from tour to tour, we, even though we're playing the majority of the songs don't ever really change, the big hits have to be part of the show. We do try and make it a little bit different, whether that's by doing a medley of songs or doing an acoustic set with some sort of medley or something new or something obscure. We'll get into that in May when we start rehearsing. We'll get into the fine details of it.
What about the stage setup? I mean, it's got to be something pretty extravagant because you're in a football stadium.
Yeah.
Is somebody putting that together a couple of years ago, of course, was putting it together because that's when the tour was. But have you seen all that? And is it something special?
I saw drawings for it way back when in 2020 when we were a go back then. But yeah, we have very clever, very talented grown-ups on the case as we speak.
Yeah. Awesome.
Proper qualified grown-ups.
How about equipment? What are you rolling these days, amp wise and guitar? What are you playing?
Les Paul's still the guitar of choice. But for Leopard, we're all playing through, Sav and Phil and myself, we're all playing through the Fractal 3s, I think they're called. To be honest, I don't know how they work. I just swear to God, I wouldn't even know how to turn it on.
Whoa.
The whole thing is I'm a real Luddite when it comes to technology. I at one point in my life, I was more invested in my gear. I actually knew the signal path of my first Bradshaw rig and all that stuff. But in Leopard, because we don't hit our own buttons on stage,
right,
which goes back to playing in the round, because in the round you have 3 different mic positions. So rather than have 3 different pedal boards and whatnot, it was way too complicated. We rehearsed our text to hit the buttons for us, like, okay, we're going to go from the verse to the chorus. I want you to hit this button on the beat or off the beat or whatever. So there's this natural sort of a disconnect with your gear, or at least for me, there is. And from that point on, I just kind of, I literally tell my guitar tech, Dave Wolf, I've told him this on more than one occasion, when he comes up to me and starts asking me technical questions, and I look at him for about 30 seconds, and then my eyes start to glaze over, and then I start thinking about what's for dinner. And I have to pick up my Les Paul, and I point to the jack plate, and I say, Dave, that's where my responsibility ends, right there. The rest is up to you and Ronan and all the clever professionals. To me, it's the guitar in my hands. And whatever it goes through. But we're all using fractals for the last several years, and they work for us because they do afford, apparently, so I'm told by grown-ups, they do afford this incredible flexibility and programming and whatnot. So, and for Leopard, you need that. When I play with Last in Line, my guitar rig is bonehead simple, so simple that I can set it up, and I don't use wireless. I just run on a cable. I got a Les Paul to a Hendrix Dunlop wah pedal, into a splitter box, into 2 angle heads, into 2 412 cabs. And so even I can set that up, and but it's a different thing that works for Last in Line that wouldn't work quite so well for Def Leppard.
Right. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, man, it's fantastic to talk to you. I've been listening to you all my life, and I was fired up. And I want to thank Phil for setting this up, because I had Phil Collin on a couple of years ago, and then I ran into Phil Susan at Whiskey a couple nights ago, and I was like, man, I'd love to talk to Vivian. And he's like, yeah, man, I'll hit him up. And he did. He was one of those guys who's like, sure, man, and just moves on. And, like I said, I've been watching you play since the first gig ever of Dio and Holy Diver. And you're just a fantastic player. And
thank you very much.
Great to talk to you. And any guy that loves a Porsche 911s is in with me, And,
well, yeah, he told me you're a Porsche guy. I said, okay, I'll talk to him.
Yeah.
We were just going to talk about guitars, Dean. I don't know. I get enough of that at work.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, God, I love cars.
I just realized that you can see my unholy mess.
It's all good. It's all good.
I still haven't unpacked.
Oh yeah, you're like me. You should see my house. Right now it looks like I live in some loft in Soho with a cool old timey radio back there. But yeah, I've got that on because my place is it's basically looks like an eBay locker. It's just like, what can I eBay next? I'm trying to go full minimalist at this point in my life. Just get rid of everything and have some kind of small mid-century type house. And just chill with my dog and do comedy,
Here you go.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna see you at the SoFi and maybe in Vegas also. And it would be great to meet you face to face and drive some cars with you if you want. It'd be fantastic.
That sounds fun indeed.
Yeah, please stay in touch. And if we cross paths, come see some comedy. You into comedy?
Oh yeah. Who doesn't like to laugh?
Yeah, I know, right?
Especially in this. More of that, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, if you're not laughing, you're crying. So I'm all about it.
Hey, anybody ever run into Pete Willis at all?
Yeah, we saw Pete Willis came to a show. The only time I ever met Pete.
Wow.
2003, maybe we were in the UK. We played Sheffield, and he came back to the hotel and had a drink in the bar after the show. So that was the only time I ever met him. And I met him very briefly, and then Joe and Sav were sitting around talking to him, and I just left them because they had a lot of catching up to do.
Man, I'd love to talk to that guy. I saw a gig where, he played the Hamer Explorers, and they were so big on him. He leaned down in the crowd rocking, and some guys grabbed the Explorer, and it went through the crowd, and the roadies jumped in the crowd and grabbed it. By the time it came, it was missing the strings and the bridge and everything. And it was, I'll never, ever forget it. And anybody that was at that Oakland gig at the Henry J. Kaiser all talk about, Pete Willis, he got his Hamer taken away. Oh.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. You go too close. Don't feed the animals.
Yeah. All right. I love you, man. Thank you for doing the show. And I'll talk to you soon.
Pleasure to talk.
All right. See you, bud. Later.